Can you hear the bell? So I call this meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I am Mary Jiang, president of the Oakland Rotary Club. Founded in 1908, we are the third oldest club of some 36,000 Rotary clubs in over 200 countries around the world. We are a diverse community of 270 business, professional, and community leaders who unite to serve our local and international communities through a commitment to service above self. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our 5,421st meeting online today. For over 114 years, we have welcomed Rotarians and guests to our club meetings. Now, today, for our thought for the day, I'd like to welcome Speaker Committee Chair Ruth Strove.
Thank you, President Mary. As you know, today is Groundhog's Day, but I wondered in history, what else is February 2 about? And so as we begin Black History Month, I looked to see what we could find for the history of Africans and African Americans. And I found three interesting things. In 1862, the District of Columbia abolished slavery on February 2nd. In 1990, the African National Congress freed President Nelson Mandela on February 2nd, thus marking the beginning of the end of apartheid. And in 1948, President Truman sent Congress a special message urging the adoption of the Civil Rights Program, including the creation of the Fair Employment Practices Commission. And today I'll quote President Truman. The protection of civil rights begins with a mutual respect for the rights of others, which all of us should practice in our daily lives. Through organizations in every community in all parts of the country, we must continue to develop practical, workable arrangements for achievement of greater tolerance and brotherhood. That felt very much like a Rotary message to me. So thank you for allowing me to provide the thought for the day.
Thank you, Ruth, for that inspiring and positive thoughts. Would you all please join me in reciting the Rotary Vision Statement? Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. Thank you. All right, guests are welcome to join our club and visit our club. To Ed Jelen, past president and past district governor. Ed Jelen, do we have any visiting Rotarian?
Hello, President Mary. I'm going to rack up a few brownies today because, yes, indeed, we have a very important visiting Rotarian that we're very honored to have visit our club. She is a member of the Rotary Club of Livermore Valley, and she's going to be our district governor in the Rotary years 2024 and 2025. So please join me in welcoming District Governor nominee Jill Durig.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting me join you on the first day of Black History Month, or second day now, Groundhog Day.
Okay, welcome. Do we have any guests online? Could you put your name, and Ed Jelen will scroll down and maybe introduce you later. Thank you. All right, at this point, I'd like to call, okay, yes, David, would you like to introduce your guests?
President Mary and fellow Rotarians, my guest today is Shelby Maggot. She works for the Atlantic Council, and she was the key person in helping us arrange for our speaker today. She's also a good friend of my son, Josh, who's back in the DC area now. So please welcome Shelby.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Like I said, we may have more guests showed up and we'll come back. All right. At this time, I'd like to welcome Rotarian Linda Bradford. Could you tell us more about a mixer event that's happening tonight?
Hi, thank you for introducing me. I have parlor around the block from the California Ballroom. And so Jesse and Riza reached out to me to see if we could have the monthly mixer there. So tonight it's at 357 19th Street. From 5:30 to 7:30, we'll have some host bites for you, and really love to have you join us.
Thank you. All right. Alita Scola, are you online to talk about a chocolate bake-off that we're going to have next week? If not, Michael Bruck, are you online? You want to talk about it? Okay, well then yes, Michael's here.
Thank you, President Mary. Yes, next week at our February 9th meeting in the California Ballroom, it's Chocolate Day. Please bring your favorite chocolate dessert, whatever it may be, along with some copies of your recipe. We'll all share the goodies, and there probably will be a few prizes awarded for the best recipes. So don't miss it. Next week, February 9th, in the California Ballroom.
All right. Okay, so I encourage everybody on Zoom, you have to come in person next week to taste all those chocolate and maybe gain 2 ounces. How's that? All right, at this point, I'd like to ask Janice Brickley. I understand you need Rotarian help for a summer internship program. You want to tell us more about it?
Sure. Thank you, President Mary, for giving me this opportunity to speak for a minute. I'm a member of the Oakland Rotary Scholarship Committee, and each year through a highly selective interview and application process, we select a limited number of Oakland High School seniors from low-income families who are granted a Rotary Scholarship for 4-year attendance at a college or university. These are really impressive young people who have strong academic records and have been involved in numerous high school and community activities. As we've done for the last few years, we'd like to help these students find summer internships. Most of these students do not have the type of connections and networks that help in terms of finding a summer internship and advancing their desired careers. One Rotary member who provided a summer internship said, and I'm going to quote, "This was a great experience. Instead of hiring a kid from the suburbs, usually I've hired my kids' classmates. It was nice to hire someone who didn't have the usual connections to business people. Our intern is a very, gave the name obviously, is a very intelligent and diligent worker. His skills surpassed any of those of my kids' contemporaries." So I think that's a good endorsement of this program. This year, we have students, we've already canvassed the students to find out who's interested in an internship and find out what their interests would be. And we do have, a group of maybe 7 or 8, maybe even 9 students who are interested. And their interests are in finance, banking, healthcare, real estate, computers, web design, IT, marketing, law, and public policy and government. So a wide range of areas, and I think there's probably people here who have some connection in all of those areas. These students would have to apply and meet your requirements, but we would try to match your needs with a student interested in any opportunity you can offer. Internships should be paid at least minimum wage and be for a minimum of 20 hours a week and last for at least 6 weeks of the summer. So if your business or firm is able to offer this type of internship, or even if you know someone, a family member or a friend who you think might be able to do so, please pass the word. And you can contact Pat Williams. She's going to be in charge of putting our spreadsheet together to try to match our students with these opportunities. I'll put her contact information in the chat. And thank you for anything you can do to help out us and our students.
Thank you, Janice. Yeah, I remember we had one a couple of years ago and it was pretty successful. So it's good that we can revive it. During COVID, it was a little harder. All right, at this time, past President David Stein, can you tell us what will be happening during President's Week?
President Mary and fellow Rotarians. Yes, February 20th, which is a Monday, is a national holiday. It's President's Day. But much more important than that is February 16th, because that's Oakland Rotary past President's Day. On February 16th, Thursday, we will have a very special meeting right in the California Ballroom. Please try and come in person. The meeting will start with a reception at 11:30. Yes, that's a reception. So food and beverage at 11:30. And then the actual meeting will start a little early at 12:20. So if you're curious about which past president brought us into the new millennium, or who launched the environmental program, or who helped create the peace mural, or HOPE, come and meet 31 past presidents of Oakland Rotary on February 16th at 11:30 for the reception and 12:20 for the meeting. We'll see you there at Oakland Rotary past President's Day.
Thank you, David. All right, Membership Chair David Kirsten. I heard last Thursday's Rotary meeting and Lunar New Year dinner was packed. Could you give us an update?
Yes, thanks, President Mary, for the time to share some pictures, and to Peter for queuing those up for us. I have some great pictures here of the mayor's visit and you there, President Mary. And, you know, she gave a great long presentation and then opened it up to questions there. And I posted the pictures online there. You see the questions at the bottom here. And if you want to see the full resolution, go ahead and go to the club's Instagram page or Facebook. And here's some kind of pre-meeting photos. And then we also have your fabulous Lunar New Year dinner that was in Chinatown, and it was attended by more than 100 people, which was an amazing event. And here's a few photos of that restaurant. I really look forward to going back to that seafood place with the 10-course meal. And there you are, giving some remarks. And there's the shot of the place, and right in the center of Chinatown. So do check that restaurant out if you weren't able to make it. And we just had a fabulous time. Here's the table I was at. I just wanted to note for the future, if you are at a table and you see me with a camera, feel free to flag me down. I don't often like to just shoot pictures of, you know, people if they don't want to be have their picture taken. So I only got pictures of our table, which was glad to do it. And thanks for giving me the time, President Mary.
Thank you for taking pictures. You're a good photographer and always come to the events. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, past President Seth Butler. I understand you want to tell us about an upcoming DEI event.
Oh, muted. Yes, that's right, President Mary. We are going to have, good afternoon, Rotarians, the Speakers Committee and the DEI Committee ask you to save the date for another engaging evening with Evan Moss, who visited us last November. As many of you may remember, Evan Moss is an anti-racism activist who has been in open and authentic dialogue about race with many different communities. In fact, even some Rotary communities. He returns to us on February 23rd from 5:30 to 7:37. The location needs to be, we got to hone in on the location. It's going to be a night event. And so don't come to the ballroom that Thursday the 23rd, February 23rd. We invite you to get deeper than a mere handshake with us and dive deeper as Evan helps to facilitate meaningful dialogue within our Rotary community. in the hopes that we deepen our connections to each other, which will, in turn, strengthen our impact on the communities we serve. So don't forget, February 23rd, 5:30, 7:30, we have signups for you to go along to. In fact, if you are interested in this event, post your name right in the chat, and Jesse will get that down, and we'll get out a way for you to register for the event too. So as many as we had for the Lunar New Year, we ought to have that many for Evan Marston, the anti-racism activist, who's going to speak with us that night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yes, please save the date, put it in your calendar, February 23rd from 5:30 to 7. And the place will be determined, but at least put in your calendar, because I know if it's not on my calendar, unfortunately, I will not remember it. Okay, so Allison, could you give us an update on Feed the Hunger and the Community Service Committee?
Absolutely. Thanks, President Mary. One of the great joys of being a Rotary member, besides meeting all of you, is that serving on the Community Service Committee, we get to hand out money to worthy organizations. So it's those that really deserve our help. And as a board member, and also having served on this committee for 4 years, I wanted to personally invite you to join us if you want to help with finding and vetting and choosing those who will receive the grants. I'm reporting this on behalf of our chair, Bruce Nye. Right now, we have 5 grants to award left in Mary's calendar year. They're about $5,000 each, but we only have 2 months to do this because there's a very lengthy approval process. So if you want to recommend some organizations, our grant guidelines are right on the website, along with the application forms. And right now we have no more grants in the pipeline. So please go send those links to people that you know that are deserving. And to be funded in this calendar year, we need their applications back by the 3rd week of February. That's in 3 weeks because of this lengthy approval. Otherwise, they roll over to next year and may not be funded next year. So our grant application is a basic, easy questionnaire, but you need to get it to them so they have time to work on it. So we specifically need people to help with organizational talents on our committee. Even if you don't want to be on the committee, even if you could just give us a couple of hours a month, we could use some help with the amazing amount of sort of backstage work, like tracking grants and following up with the grantees and delivering checks. And outreach and, proofing information on the website, taking photos, whatever your talents, I bet we could use it. So please check with Bruce Nye, our chair, or come find me at Parlor tonight and tell me what you want to do. I'll be happy to talk to you more. But I also want to talk about Feed the Hungry. That's another program our committee supports. We really hope to deliver those checks by April, ideally. But we need you, those of you who were kind enough to pledge, to please send the money in that you pledged to Jesse so that we don't have to embarrass you with a phone call. Just saying, we're not going to embarrass you. But Jesse sent you an invoice reminder in case you don't remember how much you pledged. So please get that in, because until we have a total amount, we can't figure out how to equitably divide it to all those that we're giving the money to. So thank you very much to everybody that pledged and sent their money in. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I'd like to welcome past President David Stein, who would introduce today's speaker.
President Mary, fellow Rotarians and guests, it's my honor today to introduce to you Ambassador John Herbst. He is a senior director at the Atlanta Council's Eurasia Center. He served for 31 years as a foreign service officer in the U.S. Department of State. Ambassador Herbst served as the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine from 2002 to 2006, when he worked to enhance U.S.-Ukrainian relations, helped ensure the conduct of a fair Ukrainian presidential election and prevent violence during the Orange Revolution. Before that, he was ambassador to Uzbekistan, where he played a critical role in the establishment of an American base to help conduct Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. He also promoted improved U.S.-Uzbekistan relations, encouraging the government to improve its human rights record. Ambassador Herbst also served as the coordinator for reconstruction and stabilization. During his tenure, he launched the Civilian Response Corps, grew its ranks to over 1,000, and saw their missions in many countries, including Sudan, Chad, Haiti, Lebanon, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Under his direction, the Civilian Response Corps and the Office of Coordinator for Reconstruction and Stabilization supported over 20 U.S. embassies. His responsibilities included planning and coordination to prevent conflict and deliver sustainable stabilization solutions to countries in danger of, emerging from, or in conflict. He has received the Presidential Distinguished Service Award, the Secretary of State's Career Achievement Award, and the State Department's Distinguished Honor Award. He's written book chapters, articles, and op-eds on stabilization operations in Central Asia, Ukraine, and Russia. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, The National Interest, and Foreign Policy. We're honored to have Ambassador Herbst address Oakland Rotary today on the threat of Russian aggression, the status of the war in Ukraine, and why defeating Putin is essential for America's security and prosperity. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Ambassador John Herbst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stein. And I appreciate the way you framed my talk, because I think this is how we need to understand what's happening in Ukraine. As you know, Moscow has been conducting a war of aggression in Ukraine for almost 9 years. It goes back to February of 2014. And in February of last year, they launched a major conventional war in Ukraine. Before that had been a hybrid war. Over the past 11 and a half months, it's been a major conventional war involving not just soldiers, but attacks on Ukraine's civilian population and civilian infrastructure. The United States has, in fact, a vital interest in this war. This is not some war in a faraway place where America has no interests. Our interest is pretty simple. American security and American prosperity is based upon a stable world order, especially in Europe. And Vladimir Putin has ambitions to undermine the key bases of that stability, that security in Europe. He wants to undermine NATO, and he wants to undermine the European Union by reestablishing Moscow's control over all the territory that used to make up the Soviet Union, and also substantial Russian control over security decisions in all the countries that once made up the Warsaw Pact. That includes about 8 or 9 members of NATO. The 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, were once part of the Soviet Union. And of course, states from Poland in the north to Romania and Bulgaria in the south were once part of the Warsaw Pact. If Putin succeeds in establishing political control in Ukraine, we should expect similar aggressive actions against the Baltic states, perhaps also against Poland, Romania, and so on. Right now, Ukraine is fighting to defeat Putin in Ukraine, and it's doing it without one American life, one American soldier, or one NATO soldier's involvement. He's doing it with substantial American military and economic assistance. As I think you all know, this assistance is approximately $50 billion a year. That was true last year in 2022. It's going to be true this year in 2023. Now, $50 billion is a lot of money, but it also represents, by the way, that $50 billion of assistance is both military and economic. It is matched by comparable assistance from the European Union. So it's not just the United States that's providing the support. That $50 billion that we spend a year is equivalent to approximately 6% of our defense budget. That means that this is a relatively inexpensive, a relatively economical investment in American security and American prosperity. With that 50%, excuse me, that 6% investment, and again, in terms of our national security budget, we have helped Ukraine destroy anywhere from 30 to 50% of Moscow's conventional military power. That is a substantial achievement. If Moscow were to succeed in Ukraine, we would be spending more than $50 billion a year, strengthening the defenses of our NATO allies in the Baltic states, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Romania, in Bulgaria. And if Moscow were to follow aggression in Ukraine with aggression in the Baltic states, for example, the expense for the United States would be much greater, and American troops would be fighting Russian troops in our NATO ally, on our NATO allies' territory. So the smart way to deal with Kremlin aggression is to help Ukraine defeat that aggression by providing substantial economic and military support. The Biden administration has done an adequate job defending American interests here. Adequate is not a failing grade. It is not an A or even a B grade. It's more like a C or a C plus. It's adequate because we are providing substantial assistance. And the Biden administration has outlined a general approach for dealing with Russian aggression, which is excellent. That approach involves 1, weapons to Ukraine, 2, major sanctions on the Kremlin, and 3, strengthening NATO in the East. But the reason why this policy is only adequate and not strong is because it has implemented this policy in a desultory, slow, and in some cases even timid or overly cautious way. The single most important thing we need to do now to ensure that the Kremlin loses Ukraine is to send more advanced weapons. As you all know, the Biden administration recently decided, but reluctantly and slowly, to send Abrams tanks to Ukraine. That's a good thing. It decided to do that against its own inclinations because the Germans were insisting that we send Abrams tanks before they sent their own Leopard tanks to Ukraine. And the Germans were, in fact, blocking other European countries from sending Leopard tanks because this is based upon German technology. So the administration agreed to sending Abrams tanks, and that was a good step. The sending of the Leopards was a good step. But what Ukraine needs most of all at this current phase of the war is to send longer range artillery. Currently, we are sending artillery with a range of approximately 85 kilometers. We have artillery and drones and rockets, which are extremely accurate, with a range of 300 kilometers. We are refusing to send this, even though the Ukrainians have been asking for it for about 6 months. We're also refusing to send advanced fighters like F-16s, despite months-long Ukrainian requests to send it. We are refusing to send these things now, just as we refused to send tanks until very recently, as part of a general pattern which has normally, in response to legitimate Ukrainian requests for weapons, said no, only to reconsider and after months of delay to finally say yes. We did that with Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, which have a range of about 10,000 feet, altitude range of about 10,000 feet. We did it with anti-ship missiles. We did it with the now famous HIMAR artilleries with a range of 85 kilometers. We refused to send that to Ukraine for 4 months last spring until we finally agreed in June to send them. We did it with tanks until a week or so ago. And we're doing it now with the longer range artillery and the jets. The reason for this is the administration has allowed itself to be intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. And while any statesman, any government has to take into account the possibility of nuclear war when you're dealing with a country with nuclear weapons like Russia, the United States, in fact, has 60 years, actually more than 60 years, 70 years of experience in this area, because the Soviet Union became a nuclear power in the 1950s, early 1950s, if not the late 40s. And we managed to stoutly defend American interests vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, even when they waved nuclear weapons as a threat. The Biden administration has said on numerous occasions, and this is one of the reasons why their policies is only adequate, that they cannot do certain things. For example, like sending the longer range HIMARS, the artillery with a range of 85 kilometers. We refused to do that for 4 months, saying that that would be escalatory and could lead to a nuclear war. We have bought the giant Putin con game that they will go nuclear in defending their interest in Ukraine. And we therefore enabled the Russians to intimidate us from doing the right thing to end this war more quickly by sending more advanced weapons. And that's a serious strategic error, which the administration has made repeatedly. There have been Russian experts coming out of their intelligence services and their military who've said publicly that the Russian threat of nuclear use in Ukraine is simply a bluff. But the United States has not always acted as if that is true. And that's a weakness in our policy. People who want us to force Ukraine to negotiate don't understand that Putin's main objective is not simply to establish his control in Ukraine, but again, to then, after Ukraine is in his camp, to move on our NATO allies. And if we allow ourselves to be intimidated by Putin's nuclear blackmail in Ukraine, we will face the exact same problem in defending the Baltic states, defending Poland. And if we allow Putin to take control in Estonia or Latvia, that means the effective end of NATO. And that means that our ability to secure our safety and our ability to maintain our prosperity will be greatly weakened. We are much stronger because NATO is strong. We are much more secure and much more prosperous because we also have a good relationship with the EU, and that is one driver of American prosperity. Some argue that we are spending our resources on Ukraine when the great danger is not Russia, but China, and that we have to worry about defending Taiwan. And such advocates are right that China in the long run is a more dangerous adversary than Russia, because China has a working economy and Russia does not. Russia's economy is essentially a backward economy with excellent natural resources, especially oil and natural gas, but others as well, which provide the bulk of their exports, whereas China has a real competitive economy. But you can be sure that China is watching very carefully the West's reaction to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And if he sees that Western weakness enables Putin to win in Ukraine, as the West stops sending the assistance, both military and economic, that Ukraine needs, he is much more likely to launch a military campaign to seize Taiwan. If our current support for Ukraine continues, Putin will fail in Ukraine. If we were to send the more advanced weapons that I've described, Putin would lose faster in Ukraine. And Putin losing Ukraine is the fastest, most economical way for the United States to ensure that China does not launch a war to seize Taiwan. This is basically the situation in Ukraine. If we provide Ukraine more assistance, more advanced weapons, they will be able to launch a new offensive that would break what's called the land bridge from Russia through occupied eastern Ukraine, occupied Donbass, to Crimea. If the Ukrainians can cut that land bridge, Putin will find it very difficult to supply his troops in southern Ukraine. They will have to retreat into Crimea. And Putin will find it very hard to supply his troops in Crimea, as well as the whole civilian infrastructure that he has built there. And Crimea, instead of being an advantage for the Kremlin, will actually be a weakness. And this could be the basis on which Ukraine can declare victory in this war and lead to a peace that does not simply give Putin a respite to then relaunch war in Ukraine, but a peace that leads to an end to Russia's grand imperial strategy of reestablishing its influence across the territory that once made up the Soviet Empire. These are the high stakes. It's critical for American security and prosperity that Ukraine win, that Putin lose. So I'm happy to take questions or complaints about my remarks.
All right. I will read the questions. It's on chat. So
Okay.
First question comes from Stephanie Cosenza. She ask, do you believe our NATO allies are also universally hesitant to send more advanced weapons due to concerns about Russia's nuclear weapons?
The short answer is no. The long answer is it's a little bit complicated. A strange irony, which I can explain, is that pretty much the countries that also have been intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats are the wealthiest countries, and they're farther removed from the battlefield of Ukraine than other NATO members. I'm talking about Germany, whose performance since the big invasion was better than their performance before the big invasion, but which still shows way too much timidity. They've shown clearly the ability to be cowed by Putin's threats. It includes France, it includes Italy, and it includes Hungary, and perhaps worst of all, Austria, and worst of all, Hungary. But the countries closest to the fighting, Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, understand that Putin is not going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine because he does not want to commit suicide. And former Russian intelligence officers and former Russian generals have said what I've just said.
Okay. All right. Joe Garaka asked, is rumors of dissatisfaction with Putin in Russia real? And if so, is there any hope of a regime change?
Dissatisfaction with Putin in Russia is real. It's not reflected in polls because you need to understand that polls conducted in Russia involve, some stranger calling some Russian citizen who has to worry that maybe that call is being monitored and therefore does not answer honestly. But we know this about this big invasion. First, Putin broadcast his meetings with his closest advisors just before he launched the big invasion. And it was clear from the footage that all those advisors were surprised, and most of them were deeply uncomfortable. We know, too, that for about 10 days after the big invasion, people in the business community in Russia, people in the think tank community in Russia, the foreign policy experts, were expressing their disquiet about the invasion. But then the hammer came down from the Kremlin, and all such dissent disappeared because people were afraid. 3, we know that when Putin announced the big mobilization last September. Hundreds of thousands of draft-age Russian men headed for the exits to Armenia and Georgia and the Caucasus, to Kazakhstan, to Turkey, to Western Europe, because they did not want to be drafted. This tells you that all these Russians did not see a danger to Russia in this war. They saw a danger to their own personal security by being possibly being roped into Moscow's war on Ukraine. So I believe that if Putin persists in the war, and it looks like he will, he just gave a big speech, a very bellicose speech today in Volgograd, which used to be called Stalingrad, that his ongoing failure, and as long as Western support for Ukraine is what it is today, he will fail, represents a political problem to him. If he were to decide tomorrow to leave Ukraine, and he could declare victory when he makes such a decision. He could say, I punished those Ukrainians, I punished those quote unquote Nazis in Ukraine, and now I'm coming home. I think he'd be able to survive it, but psychologically, I don't think he's able to do it. So, but if he, for example, launches another offensive and he loses, if Ukraine were to launch a counteroffensive and break that land bridge, conceivably that could lead to Putin's removal in Russia. But I say conceivably, that is by no means certain.
Okay, thank you. And David Stein asks, a new poll says Americans only want to continue support for Ukraine if we start diplomacy now. Should America do that? Why or why not?
I think that you have to look carefully at how that question was phrased in the polls, because experts know what I'm about to tell you, that right now, Putin's intention in Ukraine has not changed, which is to drive the current government out of power, to establish Russia's political control in the country. People who advocate, now I'm talking about experts who advocate for Ukraine or politicians who advocate for Ukraine, either do not care that negotiations now would only lead to a temporary halt in the fighting as Putin regroups his military forces and comes back for the rest of Ukraine later. So negotiations now have no chance of actually establishing a peace. So if the poll that asked this question pointed out what I've just said, I suspect that the results of the poll would be very different than the results that you've reported. Because you ask people generally, do you think negotiations make sense? They'll say, sure. But if you give them the details, sometimes they say, well, now may not be the time for negotiations.
Okay. Jack McAvoy asks, how can we accelerate the time from when we make a decision to actually get the weapons in their hands? Seems like much of it gets there too late.
Certainly the weapons have arrived as a general proposition late. Whether that's too late is another matter, because again, the administration's policy is at least adequate because Moscow has not succeeded in this aggression and has in fact, been thwarted on specific moves several times. Now that they've been thwarted thanks to Ukrainian superb military leadership and Ukrainian bravery, but also thanks to American and other Western weapons. So you have to credit the administration for that. But again, they've been routinely slow in sending it. And that is not an accident. That reflects that caution, which again cuts against American interests. If getting advanced weapons to Ukraine was the highest priority of the administration, instead of the hand-wringing as they make decisions to send weapons, the weapons would arrive much faster. So for example, the recent decision to send Abrams, which they did not want to do, means they're sending it via a mechanism which will only get them there at the end of this year or even next year. But if they wanted to get them there in March, they could do that. But this is political will. This is not problems with the bureaucracy. This is political will.
Okay. Well, I like to ask the question. The question is, how long can Ukraine, it's been 1 year. How long can they drag it out and survive? I mean, year 2, you said maybe these new apron comes the end of the year. That means to be 2 years or 3 years.
If we continue to support Ukraine the way we're doing now, which again is in terms of amount of assistance, it's substantial and it's good. In terms of quality assistance, it's not nearly as good. And in fact, it's best adequate. If we continue this, this war could drag on for years. I'm not saying that it will in those circumstances. It's quite possible that even with the less advanced weapons that we are currently supplying, Ukraine could reach a decisive military victory, forcing Russia to end the war. But maybe not. I am confident that if we continue to support Ukraine the way we are, Russia cannot win. But if we were to provide the longer range artillery, tanks in adequate numbers, the fighter jets like the F-16s, which by the way, we are retiring. These are not going to be taken from our military stocks. Ukraine could win the war this year. But you would need a more resolute policy, a bolder policy, a better policy in Washington for that to happen. But the Ukrainians will hang on for the very simple reason that when Moscow occupies Ukraine, they conduct numerous war crimes: torture, rape of women, kidnapping of children. These are the 3 hallmarks of Russian occupation. I had a meeting 6 or 8 weeks ago with a senior official from Kherson, which was the only major Ukrainian city captured by the Russians since their big invasion. And of course, the Ukrainians retook that city. And this official said to me, we Ukrainians understand that it's better to live under Russian bombs than Russian occupation. And there's a almost cynical argument made by people in the United States and in the West who want us to impose a peace on Ukraine, to force negotiations on Ukraine, that they're doing this for the benefit of the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians themselves know this is nonsense, because again, the compromise that the people arguing for negotiations now are talking about would leave millions of Ukrainians under Russian control, with all the barbarisms of that control.
Okay. Jesse Baldus asks, what is the state of Europe transition away from Russian energy?
This is a success story. Everyone was scared stiff when Moscow began to cut its supply of oil and especially gas, but superb coordination involving the United States, the EU, other European countries, reaching out to other global suppliers, especially of gas, but also oil, has made sure that Moscow was unable to blackmail Europe with energy. And, we were still only, halfway through the winter. And while oil prices and gas prices more so are high, they're still manageable. And now people are worrying about next winter, which to me is a good sign regarding this winter. And I am confident that next winter will be easier, even if it's colder next winter than this winter, because we'll have had, far more time to prepare for it. And the sharp drop in Russian hydrocarbon sales in Europe is going to do significant long-term damage to the Russian economy. And as long as Moscow is pursuing an aggressive war in Europe, that's a very good thing for American security.
Thank you. And David Scharf asks, can you speak to the connection between U.S. slowness to support Ukraine against Putin's genocidal war and Russian oligarchs' funding of U.S. domestic opposition to support for Ukraine?
I don't know. I have not seen good data on Russian oligarch funding of U.S. domestic opposition to our Ukraine policy. I do know money does arrive from Russia probably more from the governments, though maybe also through some business people, which is the way they like to do things, which finds its way to supporting such narratives. I don't know if it actually goes to individual Americans. I think mainly Americans who are arguing these things are Americans who don't understand foreign policy very well and who somehow conflate our failed policies in the greater Middle East with our thus far not failed policies in Ukraine. They are advocating policies that would lead to American failure in Ukraine. But it is true that there are voices in our political system that are making points that promote Kremlin's success, if albeit indirectly, in Ukraine, and that's unfortunate.
Okay.
Lenin used to talk about useful idiots in the West. Well, there are sadly useful idiots in the United States in this debate.
Okay, all right. Robert Kidd asked, what is your advice to Republican political leadership and policymakers?
Well, and I mean, I'll tell you, if you look at our political leaders, the best voices on this issue are Republicans, the Republican leadership in Congress, especially in the Senate. Mitch McConnell, James Rich, Lindsey Graham, who not only vote for the assistance that the administration wants to see provided, but are also urging the administration to send these more advanced weapons. But there is a problem in the populist wing of the Republican Party. There are voices which some of those voices actually use Kremlin-style talking points, and a number of voices vote against American assistance to Ukraine. Pretty much, I think, again, out of foreign policy ignorance and conflating our failed policies in Iraq and Afghanistan with our thus far not unsuccessful policies in Ukraine. We saw in the midterm elections that the Republicans did not do as well as they expected. We also saw that the populist wing of the Republican Party did worse than the Republicans overall. So that took a little bit of the wind out of the sail of the populist right on Ukraine, but there's still plenty of wind there, a lot of it hot air. And so we saw that in the 15 votes taken to make Kevin McCarthy the Speaker of the House. And we see some of that loud noise, we hear some of that loud noise now, but I think their influence is less today than it was before the midterms. And they represent perhaps now 22% of Republicans in the Congress, as opposed to maybe the 23 or 24% before the midterms in the old Congress. And while their voice in conservative media has not diminished, they have not made a good case. But I'll tell you this, if the administration, which of course is Democrat, were to clearly outline American interests, as I just did, and we know that the leadership, Republican leadership in Congress, takes a position similar to the one I outlined, and they endorsed the administration in this, that would enhance support in the United States for the long haul in this conflict, not just among Democrats, but also among Republicans.
Okay, I think you partially answered this last question by Great Knight. He mentioned, he said he think his question was answered, which was some GOP congressmen are seeking to cut aid and open investigation into spending in Ukraine. Do you feel this is a threat to success in Ukraine?
Well, can I mention one point in response to that question, which I had to bring up? There is a legitimate issue that people from the populist right have raised, but they're not the only ones, by the way, who've raised this legitimate issue, which is oversight of our assistance, transparency with our assistance. Now, the first point I'm going to make, I think will satisfy many in your audience, in this audience, but perhaps not those in the populist right, which is that the Pentagon and the U.S. State Department and USAID believe we have adequate oversight of our assistance to Ukraine. Now, oversight can always be better. And I know that the Ukrainian leadership is willing to discuss with us and agree to additional oversight measures. So it's not illegitimate for people in Congress to talk about strengthening oversight. Now, some of them may cynically use that to simply vote against assistance, and we should work very hard to make sure that that type of ploy does not succeed. But maybe the best way to handle this is for the advocates of greater oversight to go to Ukraine and in a transparent way talk to the Ukrainians so the American public can see them talking to the Ukrainians and understand that oversight can be handled better. But oversight is not used as an excuse to deny the American assistance that Ukraine needs and that American national interest demands.
Okay. Well, John, I wish to thank you for that detailed and analytical, fascinating presentation.
My pleasure.
Education is my area of focus for this year. The Rotary Club of Oakland is proud to partner with Oakland Promise to offer 8 $10,000 scholarships annually along with mentorships. We are proud to support many as the first in the family to attend college. In recognition of your presentation today, Oakland Rotary will make a donation in your name to the Oakland Promise to support its kindergarten to college program for every child in our city. Thank you.
That's a wonderful program. And you know, I was the first member of my family to go to college.
Great, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Does any Rotarian have any celebration or special event to share? I would like to, John Clausen would like me to speak on his behalf. He wants to ring the bell twice for 2 Oakland Rotarians, Janani Romachandran and Mayor Shang Tao, for marching through the Oakland Chinatown last Sunday in the first annual Lunar New Year parade in Oakland. And I saw John Clausen also marching in that parade. So that's why he wanted to ring the bell. And secondly, Joe Garaka wants to ring the bell for Linda Bradford and Parlor for supporting Oakland Rotary and for doing business with fellow Rotarian Joe Garaka from the East Bay Restaurant Supply too. So bell. Okay, and anybody else wants to? And then ring the bell is a generous tax deductible donation of $100 to our Oakland Rotary endowment. So, and at this point, I'd like to invite Ms. Rita Social. Would you tell us about next week's speaker?
Yes, President Mary, we have an awesome presenter coming next week. We had a wonderful today. We have another one next week. Please come join us as Christy Chung, PhD, Associate Dean for Research, Scholarship, and Partnership, Special Advisor to the Senior Vice President on DEI and Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Mills Cognitive Lab coming. She is an award-winning Dr. Christy Chung, academic leader, keynote speaker, and professor in cognitive psychology. Her main research interest is in emotional memory and aging, with a special focus on the cross-cultural application of the positivity effect in memory. Dr. Chung directs the Mills Cognitive Lab, where undergraduate students have the opportunity to conduct research studies that explore diverse factors that affect memory, including age, culture, gender, identity, and political beliefs. We look forward to welcoming her to Oakland Rotary.
Thank you. So at this point, I would like to thank Ruth for the thought for the day, Linda Bradford from Parlor for the telling us about the Valentine mixer, Michael Bruck for the chocolate bake-off, Janice Brickley for the summer internship program, David Stein for the past president reunion, David Kirsten for the Lunar New Year meeting and dinner update, Seth Butler for the upcoming DEI event and to save that date, Allison Bliss for an update on the Community Service Committee and Feed the Hunger, David Stein for introducing the speaker, John Herbst for the insightful presentation, Ms. Rika White Soso for the teaser, and the production team for managing the meeting. Please come next week in person to taste the decadent chocolate baked goods. So, share, which means thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Yay.
Great speaker.
All right, good, huh?
It was very informative.
Yeah, tremendous.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of our best.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Good, I'm
Thank
glad.
you, David, if you were the